radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You are listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Good evening. Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses. Yeah. How you doing? How you doing? Today's Monday, June 17th, 2019. 167 days into the new year. Just 198 days left. We are live from a bunker somewhere in the middle of beautiful downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States, hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the Planet. I am your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? How you doing? We got a very, very big week in front of us here. Tonight, very special guest, Dr. Stephen Greer is with us. We're going to be talking about those recent Davis-Wilson document leak. That's right. And a whole lot of other stuff tonight that we are going to cover with Dr. Greer concerning these leaks and what may be going on. So we'll be doing that tonight. Tomorrow night, right here, is our Disclosure Fest special event. Disclosure Fest, of course, is going down this Saturday in downtown Los Angeles at the Los Angeles Historic State Park. That'll be downtown. And tomorrow night, our special guests are Nassim Haramein, Jason Quitt, Billy Carson, Michael Tellinger, and, of course, my guest host is Adrian Valera. So that is tomorrow night. Wednesday night, Grant Cameron is here. Now, Grant Cameron has been silent since January, as we all know, concerning these documents. And now that they are out in public, he is ready to start talking. So, Wednesday night, Grant Cameron is here. He's going to give us the inside story to all of the Davis-Wilson UFO leaked documents. Tonight, it's Dr. Stephen Greer. Last week, a major document leak was exposed to the UFO community. The documents contain a transcript of a conversation between Eric Davis and Rear Admiral Thomas Wilson that took place in a car behind the EG&G building in Las Vegas. Dr. Stephen Greer is featured a couple of times in the document, having attended a meeting at the Pentagon in April 1997, and the subject at that meeting was UFOs. Tonight, our guest is Dr. Greer, and we're going to discuss the document, the Pentagon meeting, and how the government and its agencies present the UFO question to the public. Of course, Dr. Stephen Greer, MD, is the founder of the Disclosure Project, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI, the Orion Project, and Sirius Technology Advanced Research, LLC. His National Press Club disclosure event in May 2001 and the webcast had 250,000 people waiting online, the largest webcast in the history of the National Press Club up to that time. He has worked for 20 years to bring together the scientists, the inventors, and the leaders in society to advance new clean technology and energy systems. He's also the author of 4 books, multiple DVDs on the UFO ET subject, including the documentary Sirius and Unacknowledged, and his latest film, Unacknowledged, an expose of the greatest secret in human history, premiered right here in Los Angeles. I attended back in April 2017, and is one of the most watched documentaries of the last 2 years. His website is CE5film.com. You need to go and check that out. The links are at Jimmy Church Radio. And I would like to welcome back to Fade to Black, Dr. Stephen Greer. Dr. Greer, good evening. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
It's good to hear your voice. Nice and clear tonight. I guess the agencies cleared the call.
Good. For a change.
Yeah, for a change. Exciting times right now, Dr. Greer. Let's jump straight into it. Your time with us is very valuable, and there's so much to discuss tonight. So let's get straight to it in that the documents have been leaked. You have reviewed them. What's your assessment?
Well, they're substantially correct. There are a few errors, for example, on the first page of people who are reading along. I mean, Admiral Wilson, who is the head of Intelligence Joint Staff, was sharing, I think, with Davis some of the information, and some of what Davis took down got a little mixed up. The briefing that I did for the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency that's referred to, General Patrick Hughes, was actually after this stand-up briefing that I did at the Pentagon on April 9th, 1997. Now, the context for this is that one of the people that I've worked with over the years, Commander Miller, had asked the Admiral if he wanted to be briefed on this. The Admiral did want to be briefed. We brought astronaut Edgar Mitchell along as a guest. He was not part of the briefing per se. He wasn't presenting at all. I was the briefer. There was a formal, quote, stand-up briefing at the Pentagon. And so, prior to that, I had put together a modified version, sort of updated version of the briefing I put together for President Clinton and his director of the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA Director Woolsey. And that briefing was updated and some new documents put in there that were then conveyed to Admiral Wilson. One of those documents is a security alert from Nellis Air Force Base, so-called Area 51, although no one calls it that, by the way. We'll talk about that in a moment. And it had the project code names and code numbers as of the early 90s on that document. And that was sent prior to the meeting so that Admiral Wilson could get familiar with the material. He then, based on that document, made some inquiries and then got hold of some of these SAPs, special access projects, and particularly the USAPs, unacknowledged special access projects, that, as you can see through the memo later on in this 15-page summary of the conversation, he was denied access to the operations, even though legally he was to have oversight, but they denied him access. Now, I shared that information 20-some years ago. I think people couldn't believe it. After the CIA Director Woolsey left office and towards the end of the Clinton presidency, we revealed the fact that the U.S. president and the director of the CIA that I had briefed had similarly been denied access. And of course, I had briefed members of the Senate Intelligence Committee and a lot of other folks who most certainly should know about these operations, but who were denied access. And this came as initially in 1993, now we're talking 26 years ago, a shock to me as a young doctor. I had no idea that there were projects within the U.S. government that were beyond the reach of the president or the CIA director or Admiral Wilson in this case. So between 1992 and the year 2000, and of course we launched the Public Disclosure Project in 2001, as you mentioned. I had done many of these briefings for senior Pentagon officials, such as Admiral Wilson, which is confirmed here, as well as General Patrick Hughes, which was, I think, a couple years later, who is the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which those of you who may not know what the DIA is, it's like the CIA, but for the military and the Pentagon. It's huge. And General Hughes, during that briefing, which Admiral Wilson didn't have a lot of detail on because it happened after I briefed him, had the same problem. He had been provided a briefing by me prior to my arrival. He made specific inquiries through the chain of command. I'm quoting from General Hughes. He was flat out told there was nothing there, and he was given no information. So in all of these cases, this is how, in 2001, we made the legal argument that these projects were, by definition, illegal, unconstitutional, and therefore anybody attached to these projects, no matter what your security clearance has been and what non-disclosure agreements you have signed, may reveal that information to the public without penalty of law, because the projects themselves are, in fact, illegal enterprises. Now, when I said that, a lot of people, the beautiful thing about this document is that it confirms what I've been saying for 25 years, that these senior folks that we've been dealing with, most of them want to stay off the radar screen. You can tell Admiral Wilson, if you read between the lines here, it's not that hard to read, didn't want to get involved any further because he was threatened with being busted down to a 1-star,
right?
Because of his inquiries. And we'll talk about that in a moment. I know of another case that's even more shocking than this one that I haven't told the public about yet.
Let me jump in on one point. Yeah. It has been, I would say, not quite officially, but we are confident in stating that those documents that you are in possession of now, the leaked documents, came from Edgar Mitchell's files. So that
it may be, yeah. I don't know that. It's consistent with the fact that for a while Ed Mitchell was involved with NIDS. He knew Eric Davis. I think at some point I had met this man. I can't recall, at a meeting with some spooks near in Washington. But
that helps with the provenance, where anybody is going to scream that this was generated by somebody as a hoax. That
no, it's no hoax. I mean, I was at the meeting and I knew the background and the people that Admiral Wilson had spoken to.
Right.
And I have letters in my archives and how this meeting was set up from Commander Miller, who had a top secret clearance and had been in USAFs, but not this particular one dealing with UFOs. And I can prove this happened. So I've been saying that, I'm not. One of the problems with the UFO subculture is that there's so much fantasy and myth out there. But I don't make stuff up, Jimmy. I mean, this just confirms what we've been saying for 2 decades. But yes, I could see that this would be something that Edgar might have gotten a copy of, and then it got leaked out of his archives. I honestly don't know how it came about. All I can do is say it is substantially correct, except for a few muddled things here from the notes that were made. Mm-hmm. It pretty much confirms. I think the more shocking parts of it are further on in the memo, where the extent to which the Admiral was denied access, his rage and anger at it. People should read it carefully.
Right.
And then the fact that if he had pursued pushing on this, he was being threatened with having his rank reduced down to a 1-star, and that that there were serious threats leveled at him. So this is done quite frequently. Unfortunately, I've been on the inside of meeting with, it's now over 950 military and intelligence guys like Admiral Wilson over the last 25 years. And it's been devastating for me personally. It's shocking. Most of these people will never go on the record with how frightening and illegal this cabal of sociopaths are that run these programs. Admiral Wilson never wanted this to be known. He was saying this in a car I'm sure he never thought this would see the light of day, and here it is.
Well, and
the only good part of this is that it confirms the underlying assessment that we've been making and sharing with the public for 25 years, although it's been very hard to get people of this rank, like Admiral Wilson, to say, yeah, this quite bluntly is what's going on. I was illegally kept from getting the information. I was threatened in my pursuit of it, et cetera, and so on. And that's a very common refrain. And this is one of the methods of how the national security apparatus that are in these very super secret, black, unacknowledged special access projects, how they operate. And it's intimidating even to someone with as high a rank as he had. I mean, remember, he had the J2 position at the Pentagon. Admiral Wilson was the head of intelligence, Joint Chiefs of Staff. So, and that's why, I learned that prior to the meeting, let me give you this little vignette. So you can imagine, I put all this stuff together. I get it sent over to the Admiral prior to the briefing that we were doing at the Pentagon. And I find out prior to the meeting that the Admiral had made inquiries and gotten hold of one of these SAPs, USAPs, and was told he didn't have a need to know. And, the way it was explained to me was, he said, well, how can I not have a need to know? I'm the head of intelligence, Joint Chiefs of Staff. And they said, sir, I'm sorry, we cannot discuss this with you, and you are not to inquire about this further. And they cut him off and subsequently threatened him. So by the time I got to the meeting with the Admiral at the Pentagon, with Edgar Mitchell and Commander Miller, the Admiral was visibly upset, but also frightened. And it's one of these stories where I want you to listen very carefully to this before people, we get too far into the weeds. The meeting was supposed to be 45 minutes, a stand-up briefing that I prepared. He was so concerned and interested in the detail of the documents, evidence, information we were presenting. He then kept canceling appointments after the time limit was up. And we went on for, 2 or 3 hours. Edgar Mitchell had to go to a interview or something in New York and had to leave. And that's really what broke it up after Edgar left, because it had gone on so long. The Admiral had canceled 1 or 2 meetings subsequent to this. And at the end of it, I asked the Admiral if he would help us get this back under control so this information could be run legally, constitutionally. And he turned to me. He said, I have made inquiries and they won't tell me anything. And the best thing I know about is a B-2 stealth bomber. And this group has things that can do circles around that. And it's point, set, match. He says, I can't do anything about it. And then he turned to me and he pointedly said, and I'll never forget this moment, it's chilling. He says, as far as I'm concerned, this operation is illegal. It is not sanctioned. And if you and the people you're working with can disclose this information to the public, you have my blessing to do it. But I have gone as far as I can, and I've been stopped. Now, a lot of people have told me, did anyone in a high official capacity greenlight the disclosure project? I said, you better believe they did. It's the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson. Go back and listen to some of my presentations over the years. I've said that for years. And this is the man who said, looked me right in the eye and said, if you have the ability to pull that together, you have my blessing, do it. Because he was really, I think, angry, as you can tell in this memo, but he was also scared because, you're in a position for civilians, and I was civilian, I'm still a civilian, never been in the government, but for civilians, you can't get your mind around the level of responsibility of the largest superpower in the world, and you're in this key position, and you're being denied access to the most sensitive and important information and technology and classified program in the history of the United States, even though you have those responsibilities. That is frightening.
Yeah, he wasn't used to that. That took him by surprise.
Oh yeah. It does all these men. See, this is the thing. I've had so many meetings with people similar or higher than his rank who have been treated the same way. And this is where I began to raise the alarm bells in the 90s and early 2000s. That we have something very wrong in the world where there is a transnational group of people that, as Senator Inouye said, have their own funding mechanism, their own laws, their own operations, and are above the law. And that's how they operate. So I think that it's a very difficult thing, because what I have found is that most of these people, when they find out this very simple fact, that we have part of our government, military, intelligence, corporate structure is running in a way that is completely without any legal constitutional oversight and control on something that has this kind of power and technology behind it. So that is something that is frightening to people, and it damn well should be, frankly.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you before we get to the break, have you met Oak Shannon?
I did not meet him personally.
It seems in the document, and I'm sure that you ascertain the same thing that I have and others have, that Oak Shannon was instrumental in getting Eric Davis and Admiral Wilson together in the back of that car. They wanted Wilson on the record somewhat. Is that the feeling that you got?
Yes, and I think that was sort of a intelligence gathering operation in and of itself. We need to talk about how intelligence is actually gathered, how cutouts are created, what counterintelligence is. This is complicated, and this is why, what I've tried to do over a quarter of a century is to bring some clarity to this, but no matter how much clarity you bring, it's very complicated.
The atmosphere that we are in, certainly the last month, things have been moving at a very rapid clip. It's very difficult to keep up with, not only with the mainstream media, Trump and his UFO comments that he has made. You've got the Navy doing their thing, pilots coming forward. Now this leaked document has surfaced, which is, if it is what it is, if it is what we think it is extraordinary. Why do you think this is happening now?
Oh, I know why it's happening now. Once Unacknowledged hit 200 to 300 million people who'd seen it. If you get Netflix, go see it. You can get on the internet and see it on iTunes if you don't have Netflix. Unacknowledged pulled the curtain back on not only what most people, a radar case here, and the thing that came out last year with the jets tracking this tic-tac and whatnot. I mean, those happen every day. Virtually, it's that people think that's a huge big deal. It isn't. What's a huge big deal is the mainstream media has been unleashed to cover it, but with a very specific spin, which is a threat, the alien threat card. And what we've been saying for 25 years, that this was a plan that was created in the 50s and 60s, is that the disclosure that serves the secret agenda will be one that scares the hell out of the public and leads to an interplanetary threat. That is what they've been planning on for 60 or 70 years. That's what we're seeing unfurled before our very eyes. We predicted it 20-some years ago, and now it's happening, and people need to wake up.
Is the fear card that they are playing, it works, or they feel that it works in any situation, false flags, an invasion, a precursor to war, whatever it is, scare the crap out of everybody, no matter what it is.
Sure.
Right? And
sure.
A flu epidemic, whatever, let's scare the crap out of everybody so we can get them to respond the way that we need them to respond. Is that what's
Correct.
Playing out here, the big fear card?
Yes, and if people look at Unacknowledged, they'll see that we deal with that as thoroughly as you can in a popular 2-hour film. And if we go into all the kinds of things that have been staged and hoaxed made to look alien, but are actually man-made, and the spin that's been put on it. And you go all the way back to 1953. Go get the CIA document. I have it in my archives. It was given to me in a box of hundreds or maybe 1,000 pages of documents, after I briefed the director of the CIA personally, face-to-face. And in that, in 1953, is a memo from one of the early directors of the CIA, General Walter Bedell Smith, and it says, the psychological warfare implications of the UFO subject is of great value, and it refers to an appendix, an attachment, which was never released, that deals with the methods, sources, the spin, and how they would do that. So you hide something in plain sight. Look, too many millions of people have seen UFOs, had contact experiences, all kinds of stuff. But if you can control the narrative, let's talk about the narrative. And the narrative needs to be controlled in a way that benefits militarism, warmongering, fear, and control of the population through fear. It really isn't hard to figure out, frankly. And people say, God, are folks that cynical? I say, you bet they are, when it involves hundreds of trillions of dollars. And so that's what we're dealing with. And I think that this is why it's not enough just to say, you know, an F-16 or whatever, or a Hornet jet aircraft chased and had an ET craft on its radar. You know, we have literally hundreds of those cases in the disclosure files. And in the disclosure project materials, we have people that have much more detailed information and radar tracings than have been on the New York Times in the past year, or CNN. Why is that all happening now when there's been better material released over the last few decades, even long before I came on the scene? It's because the folks who actually hold the strings of the media, which we go into in the movie Unacknowledged, have pulled the trigger on a certain type of disclosure, not an honest disclosure, but as I wrote in 1999 in a paper that's up on our website, the disclosure that serves secrecy. It's a disclosure that serves the secret agenda that's been running since the 50s.
Let's take a break right here, and when we come back, I want to go back and specifically talk about the meeting in April of 1997 and who attended and what you spoke about. I want to get to that, and I want to get to some more specific points in the document that were brought up that only you would know. So let's do that after the break. Our guest tonight, Dr. Stephen Greer. This is Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network and KGRA The Planet. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. You can follow Dr. Greer at Dr. Stephen Greer on Twitter. We've got all of that up right now. You can go and click on the links. We'll be right back after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Dr. Stephen Greer. We are discussing the Davis Wilson leaked UFO document that surfaced into the community last week. And Dr. Greer, one of the things that I think is excellent about this document is that this isn't some government document that's been redacted and things removed. This is a transcription of a conversation in the back of a car, and it is a private document, and therefore it's unredacted, and we get everything there. I think that's one of the best parts about the document, and I don't think that questioning its, or trying to debunk this document is quite frankly going to be very, very difficult. Richard Dolan did an excellent presentation on this the moment that it did hit the public. And I think his assessment right now is pretty solid in that it's going to be very hard to refute what this document actually is.
Well, no, I mean, frankly, I'm still alive. I'm not dead yet. Unfortunately, Edgar Mitchell is. And I was there. Not only was I there, frankly, let me just clear on this. I was the briefer for the Admiral. Commander Miller wasn't, neither was Edgar Mitchell. And so I had to put together the content, both that was sent before and during that presentation and the follow-up. And it included the names on page, I think it's 2 of this document, refers to some information that I conveyed to Miller about which corporations were involved, such as EG&G or the Skunk Works and what have you. And in this memo, at some point, the Admiral is asked by Davis, more specific, and he says, there's a core secret, where he was very clearly told, don't talk about that. But, we had put together that assessment, and I'd also put it together for, one of your congressmen out there, Congressman Chris Cox of Orange County. When I met with him, he was on the House Science and Technology Committee, had been denied access. Actually, the current international director of MUFON, a very good friend of mine, Jan Harzan, set that meeting up for me, and I did a briefing for Congressman Cox, and as a result, created a memo that included all of the top secret facilities and sub-facilities at, such as, Blackjack Control and all this sort of thing, Edwards and S4 and Pahoot Mesa in Nevada, et cetera, and so on. But it also included the names of the key contractors. And that's what he's referring to here on page 2, because we had put that together. And those documents are works in progress. I update them for each incoming U.S. president, et cetera. But that's how that came about, just so people get some background on that.
Who attended the meeting in April of 1997? Do you remember?
Yes, it was me, Edgar Mitchell, Commander Will Miller. Of course, the Admiral was there. One of Eisenhower's, a young man who had worked with Eisenhower the last year or two of his administration, who is an attorney, currently at that time was an attorney, and had been in the National Guard, but was in the Signal Corps for the Army dealing with communications on this issue, and knew of Eisenhower's frustration at being blocked. And then Sherry Adamak, my assistant, who unfortunately a year or so later passed away from metastatic cancer. As you know, Congressman Schiff and myself and Sherry all got very aggressive cancers and all died. I almost died in 97, 98. There were a lot of suspicious things about that, but we're not going to talk about that tonight. And also, so those were who were in this meeting. The context of it, just so you know, I'm working full-time as an emergency and trauma guy down in North Carolina. I come up to D.C. Periodically for these kinds of meetings. I was up there on this particular trip because we had done the congressional briefings that were done in Georgetown, off-site, out of the Congress. I think it was the day before this stand-up briefing for the Admiral Wilson at the Pentagon. And we had the first dozen or so of the Disclosure Project witnesses, although it wasn't called that then. It was called Project Starlight because it was not public yet. I was trying to get the president and the Congress to get on the same page to do this disclosure, so frankly, we wouldn't have to. But in 1997, I had given up on the executive branch because the president at the time, Clinton, had signed off that he couldn't get anywhere with it and didn't want to push on the issue because a very good friend of his came to my home and said he would end up assassinated like Jack Kennedy. I said, well, okay, then I'll do it. And sure enough, we almost all died subsequently. And then I went and did this stand-up, it was another stand-up briefing for these members of Congress. So, we had chairmen of committees there and all kinds of folks. And the first dozen or so of the Disclosure Project witnesses were there in this closed meeting. The public didn't know about it. And so I went from that event at the I think next day or day after to the Pentagon to meet with Admiral Wilson. So that's how all that came about.
Was Hughes in attendance?
No. General Patrick Hughes, who was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, was not at the meeting. He was briefed separately by me, and also Commander Miller was at that meeting, and two people on his staff, one of whom was a woman who was waiting out in outside the general's office before the meeting and looked over and said, "Are you Dr. Greer?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "We have drawn straws to see who could be in on this briefing with the director, General Hughes, because so many of us want to be in there, but he'd only let his right-hand guy, who was a colonel, and one of us come. So she was there almost by accident, literally drew straws. So there were only 4 people at the meeting with General Patrick Hughes, myself, Commander Miller, a colonel whose name eludes me right now, and this younger woman who had been allowed to come in because they kind of drew straws on it.
Was there any support staff there? Anybody taking notes? Any minutes? No. Nothing like that, right? No. And I'm sure they wouldn't have allowed it. This was so sensitive, and at this point, both for General Hughes, but certainly, Admiral Wilson, I think had taken the time to make more inquiries both before and after this briefing than General Hughes had done. But mind you, both of them had been denied access, which is the shocking part of this. And the fact that that's the case in the United States of America in the last 20 years, and it's still that way today. I meet with people who are in similar situations today, but I can't talk about it. But they ask me to keep it confidential until the beans get spilled. By the way, he refers to Commander Miller spilling the beans to Leslie Kean about this, and ended up in a story in the Boston paper, the Boston Globe, and he was furious about it. But I was not part of that leak. That was something that apparently Miller spoke to Kean about. Kean did this article, and it became quite a kerfuffle, and the Admiral was furious about it, which in a sense I don't blame him. But from my point of view, it was just unfortunate. But there are folks like Admiral Wilson and actually who are on the inside of these USAPs that I meet with on a frequent basis, and they don't want to be named. I'm not going to, as a doctor, you don't reveal people's confidences unless they give you permission to. And so that's how I proceed. And, if somebody is willing to come forward, in this case, the Wilson situation had been revealed years ago in the Boston Globe. And now this has gotten leaked, so I can talk about it in all the detail I wish, I guess, at this point. Yeah, and well, let's talk about the Will Miller part, where obviously Wilson is pretty upset, and he brings up you about what possibly was leaked to you as well, and he wasn't happy about that. And he brings up the Good Old Boys Club, right? This is the Navy, and we don't talk. What is he referencing there?
Well, he's referencing the fact that he had confirmed to Miller the existence of the USAP, and a lot of details that, again, if something's provided to me by someone who's still living, and both these men are, both Commander Miller and the Admiral, I'm not going to go into, beyond what's in this document, simply because I don't want to be a liar and say, you can share this to me in confidence, because I need it on deep background so I can put the assessments together for the political leaders. And if you read this, you'll see that he approached Bill Perry, who was Secretary of Defense at one point. And a lot of people don't know what that name is. That was SecDef, Secretary of Defense. But at another point, there was a guy named Bill Cohen, Cohen, who was in the Clinton administration. But Bill Cohen was completely denied extensively information on this. I know this for a fact because astronaut Gordon Cooper and I had a meeting. We were both given a presentation at the Federalist Society in Washington, and he shared with me that the Secretary of Defense that was in the same administration at a different time than Perry, Bill Perry, that's referenced in this document, had asked him to give him all the specific details of the landing of that craft out on the dry lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base back in the 50s. And so Gordon Cooper did, of course. And then he told me that the Secretary of Defense got back to him and said, there is no record of this. It's gone into a black hole and vanished, obviously, into a USAP. So, astronaut Gordon Cooper was sharing that information with me, that conversation he had with the Secretary of Defense, and providing information to them. And so I turned to Gordon Cooper. I said, yes, that's the same boat that the CIA director is in, although not all of them, that these other figures are in, and that this is a pattern. And what I tried to explain to people is whether or not you're read into, which is military speak for briefed, and led inside the tent on these programs, has nothing to do with your constitutional duties, the law, or your rank. It has to do with whether they have done an assessment that you will go along with the horrific agenda that's operating inside these USAPs. And if they sense that you're a stand-up guy and a fundamentally honest person, they will not read you into it. I don't care if you're the Secretary of Defense, the President, the CIA Director, Admiral Wilson, Patrick Hughes, General Hughes, or on the Senate Intelligence Committee, oversight committees. So this is what I discovered between 92, when I first started meeting with folks like this, and the early 2000s. And it's what I continue to find to be the case. It's a very disturbing assessment. And the reason what we're saying and what we're doing with the Disclosure Project is blacklisted out of the mainstream media is that we're not going to stop with, oh, here's a Tic Tac being tracked and we don't know what it is. No, we're going to say, not only do they know what it is, but as you can see from this memo, we've been reverse engineering them and studying them for decades. We know how they operate. How they're operating would pull us off of oil, gas, and coal and fix the environment, but terminate hundreds of trillions of dollars of oil and mineral wealth instantly. Okay, so this is the real thing. And see, the New York Times and CNN and Fox News are not underlined, again, going to report that. Your show will, but the big, quote, mainstream media is not allowed. What they will allow to be out is something that's sort of a phenomenon that's seen, confirms it, and then attach the fact that it's a threat to our sovereignty, as Chris Mellon said, or it's a national security threat, all that kind of stuff, because that fits the narrative. And the big mainstream media is completely answering to these USAPs as to what they will and will not cover on this subject. And I discovered that in the 90s also. So the people who think we have a genuine free press when it comes to the huge major media, they're living on planet Mars. That's an absolute mythology.
What's your assessment of the Will Miller letter that is included in the document leak? And the reason why I ask you directly about that, because the letter, I don't know if it's real or not, or if it's authentic. I don't know if you've talked to Will Miller in the last week about this.
Oh, it is. I mean, no, I haven't talked to him recently, but it's his address. It's his signature. It's his letter. Yeah.
It's too perfect, isn't it? I mean, he brings up levitation and teleportation and time travel and it's to Eric Davis, and of course Hal Puthoff is referenced here, and then there's to be no mention or association of my name with your work or investigation. It's nearly too perfect. But is this the type of letter that Will would write, and it needs to be direct to someone like Eric Davis and their group that they were?
Oh yeah, I have many letters like this in my archive that are in my private archive that people have written to me in confidence, like Commander Miller. This is nothing in that letter surprises me.
Now, I want to ask you something that I raised last week about the letter, which is the eagle, the logo that he's got on it. I couldn't find that anywhere in any USG letterheads.
No, I think it's just something he used. I think he had, in 2002, he was out of his command, his naval command at that point, and I think it's just something he was using. So
you're okay with that? That didn't raise any flags for you?
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay. So you, as far as you feel that the letter is authentic?
Yes.
Yeah, explosive. It's just it's all explosive stuff. And getting back to
see, this is why I'm always so shocked. Everything in this entire document and the letter, it's everything that we've been sharing with the public for 25 years. Why anyone is shocked by this is astonishing to me. This should be settled knowledge by now. And I'm not trying to slap you down at all, Jim.
No, I know you're not.
I don't see why any of this is surprising. This is exactly what we have been documenting and proving for a quarter of a century in assiduous detail. So I guess in a sense it's confirming what we've been saying,
sure,
up to and including, getting knocked down 1 or 2 stars off of your pay grade, which Admiral Wilson refers to. But we've talked about that also in the past.
Well, and I guess to my point is the reason why it's shocking. This is what, it's this kind of evidence that we've been waiting for. Not only for you, because you've been speaking about these meetings, you've been exactly the content of what is in these documents is what you have been relaying to the public for a couple of decades now. It gets released. Finally, we can sit back and go, okay, now we have something here that is tangible. This is authentic. And how does that make you feel? Are you relieved, or do you think that there is more to come?
Well, no, I'm relieved that it's confirmed what basically we've been saying, that, a lot of people think that some of these things that I've shared are just can't be believed because there's most of these people like Miller and Admiral Wilson or General Patrick Hughes are never going to confirm it. Remember when the CIA director I briefed, when that story came out, after he had left office, I would have never discussed it while he was in office. He actually went to the pains of having everyone, the other people and himself, saying that the meeting wasn't about UFOs. I had to release excerpts from John Peterson, who was head of the Arlington Institute, a military think tank, who set up the briefing with me and the CIA director, that explicitly says not only are you going to be the first person to brief the president and CIA director on this issue, but that the most powerful interests in the world are going to do everything in their power to alter, change, and control what happens with this, et cetera, and so on. And that is an alert. Now, this is why I tell people what's sitting in my frickin' archive, which I referred to as a part of a dead man trigger. You ain't seen nothing yet. I'll tell you that right now. But a lot of it is confidential. Things have been sent. If I drop dead or anyone on my team gets threatened, every bit of it is going to hit the internet. And you think this is something, you wait until this other stuff comes out.
The comments from...
let me just say, the reason I don't do that is that there are people like Miller or Wilson or people, I can't say their names, that I've met with in the last year who know a great deal more than the Admiral and a great deal more than Miller ever knew, who in recent times, very recent times, have been in these compartments and are giving us information and details and locations and operational centers, et cetera, and so on. And that's information that I don't want people like that feel like they can't share it because I betray a trust. I hope people listening understand that. I'm not trying to keep anything secret. I'm trying to be ethical. And so I share what I can to the extent I can without going back on my word to someone who has said, you may share this information, but do not repeat my name. That happens to me all the time. Of the 100 or so Disclosure Project military corporate intel witnesses we have, if you go to my youtube.com/sdisclosure, S as in Sirius, you'll see that, we have like 5 or 6 dozen of them up there. But the ones that are the most explosive don't want to sit in front of a camera, don't want their names used. Now, this puts me in a horrible situation, frankly. I know the information and I know it's true, and I've checked out their credentials or met with them in their facilities, but I can't reference them and they don't want to come forward to confirm it. So then people say, well, is it true if Dr. Greer says it is? Well, you can believe it or not believe it. Frankly, I don't care anymore. This document proves that what I've been saying about this kind of information is absolutely true. And what I will continue to say is absolutely true, including the things where I can't refer to the person or the details in a lot of granular specifics, because I promised someone I can't. And I think people have to understand that puts me in between a rock and a hard place often.
The document gets leaked, goes public last week, and over the weekend, President Trump in an interview says, and I think this is the first time I've ever heard a president say this, that he's been briefed on the UFO subject. And the timing, again, to me, is suspect, right? It's like an avalanche right now, Dr. Greer.
Yeah. Well, it's a complicated story. And we don't have a lot of time, but as soon as he got nominated, one of his delegates for the Republican National Committee asked me to put a brief together for him. And so we did. That was put in his hands personally. That was in September 2016, a couple months before the election. Now, we had already provided material to Podesta and the Clintons and all that, so that was sort of, that ship had sailed a long time ago. But it's within 12 hours or so of him taking possession of that document, guess who they moved in as his right-hand person during the last months of the campaign for his national security advisor, senior? The CIA director I briefed, who later ended up betraying all of us, R. James Woolsey. And he was moved in within 12 hours of the document I put together that was handed into the hands of the nominee, Republican nominee for president, who then got elected president in November. So this is how the world works. I have a home in Washington. I meet with these sort of folks all the time. The kind of maneuvering that happens to intercept someone like a new president and move them in the direction of where they want to be moved, where someone like myself might be moved aside, and they'll put someone in who will then direct them to create a space force or to allow a slow disclosure, but then in an increasingly xenophobic, frightening way of an alien invasion. These are the things I'm concerned about, because of the system that's in place that's around any president or around anyone at the Pentagon who penetrates the lead shield around an unacknowledged special access project. And by the way, that term, most people have never heard of. It's used here in this memo on the top of page 7, where it says, they told me of a special projects record group not belonging to a usual SAP, special access project, a special subset of the unacknowledged carve-outs, waived programs, not belonging to usual special access project divisions as organized in 94 by Perry himself, set apart from the rest and buried and covered by conventional SAPs, buried or covered. This is the architecture we've been discussing. I've been discussing to the public for 25 years. That's in the documentary Unacknowledged. And one of the interesting things about how that system works is that they have assets that are pre-positioned to intercept an incoming president who gets something like Trump did from me, or that Clinton got from us back in the 90s. I mean, 25 years later, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Meanwhile, with hundreds of millions of people finding out about this stuff through the Unacknowledged documentary, which became a runaway, you suddenly have a group that's formed that are people who have been on the inside for years, like Putoff and Chris Mellon and all these folks, and they start seeing that certain things get into the media, but with a very specific spin of a violation of our national sovereignty, or a national security threat, or a threat assessment office. It all has this subtle, and believe me, at this point, it's all very nuanced narrative and almost subliminal. But that's how counterintelligence works. That's how psychological warfare works. And you and I, my friend, are watching this before our eyes unfold in virtually real time in the last year.
It's been crazy. And it's also, for me and for this community, it's also very exciting, because we're all here for our own personal reasons. You know, we have how do I want to say this? A personal event happened somewhere, and we are chasing this knowledge. And to have this, it's confirmation, right, for the community, where they can just sit back and go, okay, finally, not only am I not crazy, but neither are the people around me too as well. And that's the part that I find so exciting. Let's take a break right here, and when we come back, we're going to continue the conversation, but I do want to get into who is controlling this narrative and why. This is Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Dr. Stephen Greer. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Follow Dr. Greer at Dr. Stephen Greer. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Dr. Stephen Greer is here. Tomorrow night is our Disclosure Fest special event with Nassim Haramein, Jason Quidd, Billy Carson, and Michael Tellinger. Our guest host is Adrian Valera. And then Wednesday night, Grant Cameron will be joining us to also continue with the inside story of the Davis-Wilson UFO leak. Dr. Greer, I've got two things I want to bring up. I want to go back to President Trump for a second. This weekend, he said, and this very curious comment from him where he said, well, I don't really believe in UFOs, but when I find out, you'll be the first to know. Do we take him literally with that comment?
Look, I don't know. I can't be inside his or, Obama's head or any of the others that have made comments that are deflective. Perhaps he's been threatened the way Admiral Wilson was threatened or the way President Clinton, sent a good friend of mine home down to North Carolina who said, look, we're very concerned that if the president takes the recommendations that you've outlined in your brief that you gave the CIA director, he'll end up like Jack Kennedy and be assassinated. So I can't speak to what's in their heads. I will say this I know for a definite fact. If they are forceful in inquiring about this, they will be provided the briefing that is psychologically tailored to their worldview. Let me give you a great example. We had a president many years ago, probably half your listeners weren't alive, named President Ronald Reagan. And he was, I know a man who was on the committee that briefed him on some of this stuff, but he was representing the defense industry while he was a colonel in the Air Force, Colonel Hallman. And his purpose was to present the UFO material in a way that was a threat to get a lot of money, including black money, into the so-called SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, to put weapons up in space. And so that was tailor-made to appeal to Reagan's worldview so that he would then approve that vastly expanded multi-billion-dollar Strategic Defense Initiative's space weapons program way back in the day in the 80s. So this is something that most people don't realize, that there will be a limited amount of information provided, but they are very good at doing a psychological profile of whoever it is that they're briefing. And of course, Truman first said and Clinton repeated that the White House is the crown jewel of the federal penitentiary system. I mean, you're in a bubble like you've never seen. So unless someone like my group and the material I get can penetrate that bubble, which we do periodically, they're going to, in a hermetically sealed system. And, you got the Foxes who are guarding the hen house here, who then will do a tailor-made limited briefing where they can spin it any way they want. For example, recently in the mainstream media, you've had people who come out from Lockheed or Chris Mellon, who is related to the Paul Mellon family, who started the CIA and all that stuff. We can get into that if you want, who are saying, well, we need to study this, but we don't really know what they is and who they are. We don't know how they operate. And of course, that's all a lie. You look at this Wilson memo and the thing that Davis created, he's talking about the fact that, these things have been studied. And Miller's talking about the levitation, teleportation stuff. Obviously, it's a very cherry-picked disclosure that is conditional and is made to have a certain effect on people's awareness, which is why they always work in, however subliminally, a threat. Well, look, if you have interstellar technologies that are 100,000 to 1 million years past what we have, if they were a genuine threat, we'd know about it. And it would have been all over about the time we detonated the first atomic bomb. However, it's a complex thing. A lot of people miscaricature what I say and say, oh, the ETs aren't hostile towards us. Well, actually, I think they're very hostile towards an aspect of human behavior called war making. And they're very concerned that we could destroy this planet and escape from our solar system and be an existential threat to other planets. So I think people try to come off, this whole issue has to get discussed in a more nuanced and detailed way. Because imagine if you were to come across our civilization and see nuclear bombs and stuff going off, and then we're going into space and we have covert weapon systems on satellites that frankly are killers that can kill anything out in space or even down on the Earth that have been functional for decades. You would have some concerns about the direction our planet is going, in addition to the fact we're destroying the biosphere unnecessarily because we've been on fossil fuels and chemicals for 70 years past when we should have been, or maybe longer. So I think that we have to look at this from multiple perspectives. But what I know is happening, and we were warned of this back in the 90s, is that they will surround whoever is the new president. If this is going to come out, they're going to control the narrative. And since the mainstream media is in their back pocket of this majority intelligence community, it's called MAGIC now, MAJIC, not Majestic 12, by the way. If MAGIC wants the mainstream media to cover X case and not Y case, but cover in a way that has X spin instead of Y spin, and the spin they want is one that's frightening to the public, that's what CNN and that's what the New York Times and the Washington Post and Fox and on and on and on and NPR are going to do, full stop. So, this is unfortunately what it's come to. And thank God we have shows like yours and the alternative media and the internet, but the record, let's call it the media of record, the establishment, respected media, no offense to you at all, like the New York Times, they're not going to cover this truthfully. And anyone who thinks they are very sadly mistaken. Go look at what a counterintelligence master like Richard Doty, whose whole life was disinformation and counterintelligence, says in Unacknowledged. He would carry bags of cash to national security editors and local and national media to get them to tell the story the way they want them to tell it. That's how it works. It is a corrupt enterprise, through and through, rotten to the core. And that includes especially the media.
There's another reference in this document that was pretty standout, which is crash retrievals, landings, contact, reverse engineering. All of that is real.
Yep.
But alien abductions are not.
Yeah, on the last page is the most important thing in this document. Well, as you know, about 25 years ago, I was read into, now this is stuff we've never talked about in detail on your show. I was read into a project with some guys who were doing the abductions and what their stagecraft was, what their technologies were, the extent to which they could simulate things, and the victims. And then people said, oh, Dr. Greer's terrible. He doesn't appreciate the people who've been victimized. I do. I very much do, because I had that done to me. In 94, after I briefed the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, they came in and tried to abduct me out of my hotel room. It's terrifying. And I will tell you that about 25 years ago, I got read into very detailed aspects of this, that there's one little section in the movie Unacknowledged where when I ask Doty about this, he says, yes, that is, but I can't talk about it. That's still an ongoing program. And the question was about abductions being staged by military and corporate and aspects of this secret program for its psychological warfare value. So here's the problem. People have had real contact with ETs. Sometimes those people will be subsequently targeted with a abduction that scares the hell out of them and then alters their view of the ET presence. This isn't hard to do, by the way. And unfortunately, when the man who read me into this initially, and I since have found dozens of people who've been in these USAPs who have used man-made looking things that look like a UFO, but they're man-made, and using electronic warfare and chemical systems and what have you to do abductions. One of the ones that Doty, if you look at his full interview, that's on the iTunes store, that's the special feature that goes with Unacknowledged on iTunes, you'll see that he talks about that one of them was one out in, I think it was in Washington State, where some poor civilian saw a classified aircraft that we had that's like one of these anti-gravs levitation devices that shouldn't have. They sent out an intercept team that then simulated an alien abduction so that these people would think it was something ET and not ours. Because the only thing, Jimmy, more explosive than the fact that we're being visited by extraterrestrial civilizations is that there is an illegal group of people that have figured out a lot of the energy and propulsion systems of it and are keeping it not only secret from the public, but they're keeping it secret from Admiral Wilson. They're keeping it secret from General Patrick Hughes. They're keeping it secret from people who have to execute the orders of the president when they're ordered into battle someplace. And they don't have access to that knowledge and technology. That is a serious threat to freedom and democracy, exactly what Eisenhower warned us about in his farewell speech in 1961 as he left office, when he said, beware the military-industrial complex.
Well, and with this big rollout, this disclosure narrative with the mainstream media and everything else that is happening all at the same time, these are decisions that have been in play for quite a while. The script has been written for such a scenario. I have two questions. Yeah. I have two questions for you on that. One, who actually would be doing it? That's the first thing. But the second reason the second question is why? Are they trying to get out in front of something that they are not in control of anymore? So let's do the question one first. Who is writing this script?
It's written by Magic, the Majority Intelligence Committee, and senior people on that committee who have this gamed out like you would a war game, but in 38 dimensions, way in every possible scenario with computer simulations. And this is literally how it's been described to me. So that we do something with unacknowledged, they form something that puts the information out through mainstream, but puts a spin on it. It's a point counterpoint. Remember, on May 9th, 2001, we did the National Press Club event. Almost 800 million people globally ended up seeing that in various media around the world. 4 months later, we had 9/11. Okay, stop right there.
Right
now, if you think that was a coincidence, I've got a swampland to sell you in Florida.
And so that narrative is then passed on to mouthpieces like Chris Mellon, and he can only go so far.
I don't know. I think those people would have, let's say, it's like blind people holding on to different parts of the elephant.
Sure.
Someone like that's holding on to one hair hanging off the ear, like Chris Mellon. They don't have this kind of picture, but they have their orders and they do what they're told. And that would be same true of people like Hal Puthoff. It'd be the same thing. I don't want to get into names. The point is that that's how compartmentalized intelligence works. Special compartmented information. TSSCI, top secret, special compartmented intelligence and information. You do not, very few people. Now, there's this one man I've recently debriefed who was in the technology management office of the sub-basement of the Pentagon for 10 years. And he had baseline clearance across 18 of these USAPs, unacknowledged special access projects, because he had to for a special project he was doing. And so he has been sharing with me granular information about what he learned from these various facilities and operations. But most people are in a very tightly controlled, like hermetically sealed USAP. There are very few points of going in and out of that USAP. Most people in one USAP don't even know the other one exists. Give you an example. Wilson is referring to this, where there are certain, and he says, well, that's all that person knew, or this is all I can comment. It's because it's structured so that those that sort of nearing the top of the pyramid would have a higher view of what's going on in all the base corners. But people who are in a USAP not cleared to what's called baseline clearance across a number of them would only have a very tiny portion that they would know about. Now, when you deal with counterintelligence, mouthpieces who are saying things to the public, they're being told to tell the public a very specific script. And they know that they're not even to ask what's behind it all. They're just doing their job. They have a role to play, let's call it. And it's a very limited role. I have a different role. I'm not part of the government. My role is to try to put this whole big mosaic together and come up with something, an assessment. And I do the best I can with the resources I have. But most of these people would not have that kind of access. I've met extremely few people who have had clearance out of more than one USAP. And so even the way, if you look at what was shared about the so-called Area 51, the things where they're working on man-made advanced propulsion systems is hermetically sealed, and those people have nothing to do with the folks who are working in the underground facility, that's sort of horseshoe-shaped, that's dealing with the ET craft that they're studying. And there's a facility near Lawton, Oklahoma, at near Fort Sill, where there's a downed ET craft that's in an underground facility where they're trying to figure out how these objects, quote, cloak and uncloak, or materialize and dematerialize. And, I've been read into the specifics of where that is, the size of the craft, the contractors that are studying it, and all that kind of stuff. Now, the man providing that information to me, I would love for him to come on your show, but he's terrified. And so the best I can say to people is I faithfully convey, as shocking and as far out as some of this stuff is, the truth as I have been able to confirm it to be.
All right. So the second part of the question then, and that was an excellent answer, by the way, very thought-provoking. The second part of the question was, why now? Are they trying to get out in front of something that they can't control?
Well, there are a couple things happening. One is what our project has been doing has put this on a radar to the point most public, certainly no one in the UFO community knows. I hear from, let's just say, very prominent people all over the world all the time who are clicking on Unacknowledged on Netflix. And they're going, what the fuck? Excuse my French. What the hell's going on here? So what's happening is that they're trying to contain the narrative by doing a countermeasure through the mainstream media. That's one thing. The other one is, and they know that this has been a long-term project, the only thing more devastating to the agenda of these sociopaths who have been maintaining the secrecy than the disclosure effort is the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind effort. Go to CE5film.com. When you get, and this is what we're planning to do when it comes out later this year, when you have 50 million, 100 million, 200 million people learn that using non-local consciousness, remote viewing, and coherent thought, if you do it within a certain ethical construct of peaceful contact, nonviolence, you will have contact happen. And when a certain number of people do that, you're going to hit the tipping point, that 1% quantum leap factor that they talk about in physics, that 1% phase transition that happens. And there is going to be a massive amount of activity that happens that are a direct contact. And that's what the ETs are waiting. Everyone says, why don't they land on the White House lawn, blah, blah, blah. Larry King asked me that. Everybody asked me. It's no offense, dumbest question ever.
Right.
They're waiting for someone to answer them back, because they've been answered with either denial, defamation, being shot at, downed, hit by electronic weapon systems, all the way back to Roswell, which was an electromagnetic weapon hit, by the way. And they're waiting for some people to organize on this planet that can be diplomatic and peaceful and reach out to them. That's what these civilizations are waiting for. It's not complicated, Jimmy. And so when this CE5 film comes out, and CE5 is a term I coined back in 1990 to describe human-initiated peaceful contact with these civilizations that is done by a group of people It can be done individually, but by a group of people to further the relationship, a beneficial relationship between humans and these civilizations. When a critical number of those people do that because of the power of consciousness shifting the morphogenic field, shifting time, space, matter, all of it gets shifted through higher consciousness, that is going to cause a transition and a ramping up of this. And that they know that's what we're working on. That's what we're crowdfunding right now. And go to CE5film.com, and if you can do $1, fine. We need to get support for this, because when that comes out, if enough people actually turn off the TV set, and no offense, the internet, and go outside and do this, these events are going to happen all over the world at a pace that's going to be the ultimate disclosure. Why? Because the disclosure that is most likely to happen from the Congress, the president, the mainstream media is going to be, let's call it a fake disclosure. It's going to be a disclosure spun by a narrative of fear that's going to just benefit the same military-industrial complex that's been running the secrecy to start with. The only way you're going to change that dynamic is for we, the people, to seize the control over this issue and do the right thing and just leave the government behind. I know it sounds terribly libertarian, but you just leave them behind. You say, adios, amigos. We're going to make contact. You guys have a good time with your silly games.
This conversation is going to get a little heated now. In that this document names about half of the crew over at TTSA. I don't want to speak specifically about TTSA, but the crew itself over there with all of the direct Pentagon and CIA connections. At what point do we trust the narrative that is coming out of Washington, D.C. right now, or do we not trust what is happening?
You cannot trust it. This is what we said as soon as that thing surfaced. Look, I personally introduced Tom DeLonge and all those folks to this subject way back when he was very young. I was on stage with him as they performed at the Mellon Arena in Pittsburgh with three of my four daughters. What I'm concerned about is that people are victims. People who aren't read into a USAP are victims of a certain, let's call it cherry picking of intelligence, like we did on 9/11 and the Iraq War, where it's presented with a foregone conclusion. In the case of what's happened with TTSA, you have people there who are given orders to present certain information with a certain narrative spin. And that is absolutely being directed from people inside the cabal, inside MAGIC, Majestic 12. It's actually called MAGIC, Majority, M-A-J-I-C, Majority Intelligence Committee. And what I'm concerned about is that is something that people say, well, isn't it a good thing? Well, actually, a disclosure that serves the long-term agenda of global destruction and interplanetary war is worse than the secrecy. So the answer to that is a definitive no. A disclosure that is tailor-made to serve the controllers, the cabal that's been running scams on us for decades, that is not a disclosure that is going to be edifying to the public. It's going to be very destructive to the human future, and we need to be very careful. And that's why I don't really care about UFO politics, personalities, blah, blah, blah. I do care about how this issue is presented to the public, and if it's presented in a way that leads us down the path of conflict and hatred and war, all I can say is that future is going to be much worse than our past, which has been scary enough with 2 world wars. So I think that this is why anyone of goodwill and conscience has to look at this and ask, why are these people who have been involved in this cabal with their operations for 30 years, 40 years, coming forward, putting things out there that we know are half-truths, and then spinning it in the direction of a narrative of a threat or a violation of our sovereignty, as Chris Mellon said in his interview on Fox, when in reality, no such thing is happening. I'll give you another example, Jimmy. Remember, I put together a lot of folks who had been in nuclear facilities where there had been ET craft that came over in the Minot, North Dakota case. You had 18, maybe 20 intercontinental ballistic missiles taken offline. They couldn't be launched. But, one of the officers in there, a captain, said what he felt from that event was that the ETs were saying, please don't destroy this beautiful planet. But if you do launch all these missiles, we could neutralize them so the Earth itself isn't destroyed and turn into just a radioactive blob floating through space. The same thing was happening in the Soviet Union during the Cold War. This was the 80s when that event happened in Minot, North Dakota. Now, there are other people who come along in the disclosure movement, taking those same witnesses, the same event, and spun it as a threat to our national security.
Right.
So you can take the same set of facts and spin them in a direction that serves the secret keepers, the Majestic 12. And that is what we're seeing happen. And that's why I've been raising this sort of like a Paul Revere call here. People got to be careful of this. And you can't just say, gee, can't we just all get along, sort of a Rodney King moment or something, and just go along with anything that's put out there with any spin. No, actually, because as I wrote back in 1999, a disclosure that serves secrecy would be this kind of event happening, but would be destructive to the human future. We want to have a disclosure that is hopeful, that is truthful, that says that we need to go forward in space peacefully without weapons. We need to make contact with these civilizations in an enlightened way, not a militaristic way. And we need these technologies not deployed as covert weapon systems, but as the means to run our planet without damaging our biosphere and destroying this beautiful planet that we all share the free air of Earth with. And so I think that's what we need to be focused on. But if a disclosure is, and what I see happening, they're pulling a trigger through the mainstream media to ramp up a disclosure that has one part evidence, one part spin. And if that continues on the path that they're doing, we should expect an acceleration of the warmongers.
Let's take a break right here. Dr. Greer, this is Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Dr. Stephen Greer. I am your host, Jimmy Church. We're discussing the unbelievable Davis Wilson document leak that happened last week. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Dr. Stephen Greer. We are talking about the Davis Wilson UFO documents that hit the community last week. Dr. Greer featured on a couple of pages there. And two questions. One, did you feel uncomfortable that you were brought up in this in such a public way? And two, have you been contacted since the document surfaced?
No, I haven't been contacted by the principals here, and it didn't bother me. Look, there's nothing in there that isn't something that I haven't been sharing for quite a few years. So I'm happy to confirm it. In a way, I'm glad that there's a document that confirms this. I mean, if you look on page 12, when David says any politicians, and the Admiral says no White House name, no congressional staffers that he could reach. In other words, the normal people who would be overseeing a sensitive project weren't involved on that list. I mean, this is on page 12. And then he's talking about the ET craft. At first he said, was it Soviet or Chinese? And he said, no, it was actually, which is also something that we've been saying for many years. So a lot of this is all information that, of course, we knew already. On page 14, Davis says back to the bigot list, can you describe the type of people? He's a corporate type, scientists, technicians, engineers, scientists, managers. And that's completely correct. The real center of power on this is what we started saying in the 90s, and what we discovered is that it's been highly corporatized in the USAPs interfacing with major corporations, Booz Allen Hamilton, Lockheed Skunk Works, EG&G, where this meeting was, by the way, EG&G was instrumental in building one of the very first anti-gravity craft that got operational. So what's interesting about this is that it's confirmatory of the assessment that we've been trying to share with the public, and also, I might add, with politicians and the media for a very long time. And I think it's useful in the sense that for politicians and people who are not given access to these projects, this is just a data point of confirmation of the broad strokes of how this USAP is operating, that it's being run illegally, that someone like Admiral Wilson and left out of the picture when constitutionally, legally, they should have had oversight. And he says that in no uncertain terms. So the Admiral reiterates that in more than one place in these notes. And this is exactly why a lot of people ask, why did you leave your medical profession? I was begged not to, by the way, by close friends, family, and a lot of folks. And I said, this is too big of a problem. I couldn't do what I was doing, being up all night in an emergency department and handle this mess. And so I had to choose. But I had them. That's how big of a choice. You go talk to anyone who's gone to medical school and residency and practice and all the years of training to give that up, because I understood what was at stake here, Jimmy. It's a huge thing at stake in the fact that this is being mismanaged, that some of the worst elements that are very criminal are running and have possession of the most powerful technologies. And the good folks that I have met at the CIA and at the Pentagon, and there are a lot of them that are, I'm not one of these people who just with a broad stroke bashes everyone. Some of the finest people I have ever met are in the Pentagon and armed services. But the ones that I call them the white hat, like Admiral Wilson, are shut out, and then they're scared and threatened. And so, a leak like this confirms what we were saying. And, he's retired now. But remember, if he had retired having had 1 or 2 stars knocked off, his retirement pay from his years of service in the Navy as an admiral would have been greatly reduced. And they threaten people with that kind of stuff. And so what they end up doing, I've had people of higher rank than Admiral Wilson turn to me and say, look, you're asking us to reel in a massive whale, and we have a 5-pound line. We can't even pull in a 5-pound fish here. And we just don't have the ability to do it. And we have been stood down. I mean, it was really a telling moment when, I said, look, we need for your help to help us and what have you. And Admiral Wilson said towards the end of the meeting, he says, I've been blocked and I can't. And this group, I have learned, have technologies that can do circles around any aircraft I have. And so I'm outgunned. And he flat out said, I'm outgunned. He also said, he asked me, who else have you briefed? And I said, well, the director of the CIA, and provided the briefing for the president, and this person on Senate Intel, and from Nevada, Dick Bryan, and others. And he said, well, what is their situation? I said, they're in the same boat you're in. And you could just see the look on his face, like, oh my God. And so he said, look, best of luck to you. Hope you can do this. You have my blessing. Anyone who wants to come forward, it's absolute. And this document proves this. They're not in violation of any law of the United States, because the underlying project that they swore an oath of secrecy to is itself a criminal enterprise. And we can prove it in a court of law.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that a few times over the last week. I wanted to ask you this really quick. When he was discussing the core secrets, and he mentions, the top defense contractor. What's your best guess on that? Is it Lockheed Martin?
Yeah, it'd be the Skunk Works.
Skunk Works, right.
Yeah, and that's why it's so funny. There's on this TTSA group, there's a Lockheed Skunk Works.
That was my point.
We really need to study how this works. I'm going, yeah, dude, let me give you a date as to when. October 1954 is when we mastered gravity control, and we've been building various iterations of things that are man-made UFOs from the 50s onward. So one of the things that I find very comical, I mean, it's sort of almost farcical, are the people who are surfacing kind of saying, yeah, we really need to start looking into this when they've already embezzled trillions of dollars from us U.S. taxpayers and have been studying this stuff for 70 years. And now they're going to tell us, gee, we need to start looking into this. Can you give us some funds so we can start looking into it? It's a charade.
You bring up one of the best points, though. Even though this conversation took place in 2002, when you have Kit Green or Hal Puthoff or Eric Davis, Skunk Works, these are part of the core group over at TTSA. Mellon, surprisingly, wasn't mentioned in this document. He's the one guy that's not there. But it's the same core group from 2002, 1997, and your briefing that is over at TTSA. Now, is that something where we step back and say, well, we're not surprised they've been pursuing this for a long time, or is this part of a communication agenda being forced out onto the general public that has been worked on for a very long time?
No, these are people who have a specific role to play, and they have their marching orders, and they're telling the public exactly what their handlers are telling them to tell the public. This I'm saying with absolute certainty. So I'm not speculating here. I know it for a fact. I know people who are very high up at the CIA who are currently there who have confirmed this to me. This is what's happening. Now, I'm very happy for material and gun cameras or radar tapes to be released. But the part of it that is of great concern is the spin and narrative. If you look at the interview that Chris Mellon did on Fox News, talking about the violation of our national sovereignty, and then others of them that have talked about the national security threat. It's always couched in a way that is embedding the idea subliminally as they march forward with this fake disclosure. That's terrifying. Now, frankly, they don't have to do much to tease that out, because the UFO subculture has been rife with this kind of stuff of, mutilations and abductions and evil aliens, and the good ones and the bad ones. And you'll notice the good ones always look like someone from Norway, and the bad ones are different. There's a profound level of racism that is being exploited in the human consciousness. We fear those who are different from us, whether it's gay or straight or black or white. Now it's human versus alien. And that's the narrative they're exploiting. They're exploiting the collective human history of conflict around duality, around an us versus them. And now they're trying to expand it. Instead of one nation or one economic system or one race or one religion against another, let's unite America and the world around an alien threat. It's just like the movie Independence Day. And I think that this was always the plan, Jimmy. This was the plan that was created in the, at least by the early 50s. And they have been sitting on their cards, letting this thing run forward until the right time. For some reason, members of this cabal and covert government have green-lighted some of these folks to come forward with evidence and information and to open all the doors to the major media. So they speak of this in a way that's a threat, and within the threat matrix that we're facing. And this was predicted. I mean, Werner von Braun on his deathbed told Carol Rosin that they will hoax an alien threat, and it's all a lie, and a damn lie. But that is step back for a minute. A few years ago, there was a CIA director for Obama named Leon Panetta. And he had also was Secretary of Defense for a period. And I had put a briefing together for him. One of his friends reached out to me from when he was a congressman from California, Carmel, California. And he said, and after I gave him that brief, a few months later, he was in the news talking about, we're spending, I think he said something like $100 billion a year chasing down 70 Al-Qaeda members in Afghanistan, 70. And it's just crazy. So how do you sustain a massive military, industrial, corporate, financial spending nexus if you're running out of really large viable enemies. Well, you roll down one threat and you spin up another. So around the time we rolled down the Cold War threat, we spun up the terrorism threat. Now we'll wind down the terrorism threat, and we'll spin up the alien threat. And that's what we're witnessing. And this was predicted in the 70s by Werner von Braun, who had seen the plans and been privy to them. And we've been sharing this for 25 years. I think that the thing that concerns me the most is that how gullible the public is to the sort of jingoism and sort of rah-rah, false patriotism, I call it. There's nothing patriotic about, going into a contrived conflict that kills thousands or millions of people that benefits the war profiteers and the military-industrial complex. And the irony of all this, that's really tragic, a true tragedy, is that the unsuspecting and most immediate victims of this are military people themselves, like Admiral Wilson. He was a victim. General Hughes was a victim. So I think that people need to understand that the way counterintelligence works and the way this group works is very deceitful but sophisticated. I have to say, they're extremely good at what they do. And the only good exit strategy I see to it, I don't see it coming from the White House or the Congress, because I think those guys can be played and threatened and bought off easily, is the masses, the public, going out and making peaceful contact, which is why, go to CE5film.com. You're going to see why we're doing this film. It is to create a shift in human consciousness into a manifesting a very good future, because the likelihood that there's going to be a good resolution of this from the centers of power. When was the last time, Jimmy, something good came out of the centers of power? I'll tell you when. Never. Not the American Revolution.
Right.
All right. Not the American Revolution.
Right.
Not the Civil Rights Movement. Not the great gay rights movement. Not the women's movement. All the things that have advanced our civilization. Those weren't edicts from on high and from the centers of power. Those came from the grassroots. So now we, the people, have to do this from the grassroots. All of us.
If you have a prediction to make on what is next, you just said fake disclosure, and I respect that, and in a weird way, I feel that. But here we had, this document leak. We've got, President Trump. Everything else that has been happening. If you had a crystal ball, what do you think is next? Is it going to be some more crazy document leaks? Is it going to be something out of the Pentagon? Is it going to be televised on History Channel? What do you think is next?
Yeah, there's going to be a steady, let's call it slow and then increasing pace of a disclosure that serves the secrecy of the controllers, which most people will be deceived by. However, here's the good news. If you study the science of consciousness, you only need 1% of a population to do something in a positive, constructive way from a deeper level of awareness to cause a massive shift in society. This has been proven and studied over and over, not only in quantum mechanics and physics, but in consciousness studies and sociology. So there's a very good reason why we're doing the CE5 film right now, rather urgently. I mean, we started the crowdfunding just a couple months ago, and we want this film to come out in early December this year. So we're really moving fast on this. But the reason is that we need to reach that critical 1%, 75 million people on planet Earth, to not only understand this, but to begin to do something positive. And guess what? Everything you need to do it, you're hardwired for it. You're conscious, you're awake. The making of contact is very simple. You can do it with 2, 3, 4, 5 people. You don't have to be part of a huge event and out somewhere in the desert. And you can do it on your own. And what that does is not only what you experience, but the consciousness that you're entering, this more expanded, higher state of consciousness that's peaceful, that affects everyone around you within a concentric circles all over the planet. It actually has an effect that isn't localized. It's called non-locality. And entanglement in quantum physics. And that happens on this conscious level. And so it's like where they've done studies with random number generators, and they can have people think to it and change whether it's putting out more zeros and ones, even though they're not wired to it. It's just the power of consciousness and intent and positive thought and energy. So that isn't just New Age claptrap. That has been proven in science and physics. And the truth is that if all of us understand that, and we all come together and say, look, we're going to just leave this charade, of the cabal and the majestic and all these covert USAPs behind, and we're going to do something that on a higher level, and that they cannot stop. They can't control that. And that is one of the reasons why we're doing this right now, but also why I think people need to take heart. You can't give up. You never give up, even though I've certainly wanted to since 94 when I was going to shut down this project, frankly, due to some things that happened to me. But I think that you keep going because you keep your vision on the far horizon of a planet that is living peacefully with its interstellar neighbors, that has technology that would give us no pollution, no poverty, sustainability for hundreds of thousands of years of conscious evolution. And you see that isn't hundreds, it's 20 years away, 50 years away. It's virtually within my lifetime, and I'm an old guy now. I mean, I started this project when I'm in my 30s, and now next week I'll be 64. So what I tell people is that, this is an ultra marathon, but it's doable, and people need to take great hope in the idea that if you empower yourself to do something positive, it'll happen. Don't get caught up in all the negativity. And yes, there's going to be, I'll tell you, this situation with a fake disclosure that's geared up towards conflict, that's going to get much worse before it gets better, is my prediction. However, there's this other thing happening where people can come together in a positive way, in an enlightened way, and create a new civilization, because you don't need a 50%. It's not like a political election. We need 1%. So we need to be those points of coherence that shifts where our civilization is headed, and not be dispirited by this sort of nonsense of the counterintelligence operations.
When all of this started back in December of 2017 with the New York Times and spun out of control with the mainstream media grabbing hold of this story and presenting it to the public, the one thing that we were told was going to happen didn't, which is religions didn't collapse, Wall Street didn't fall into the ashes, people didn't jump off of buildings. And obviously it's safe to say that we can handle this, right? There's that part. But now I think the man understands that we can handle it. Does this change the way that they're rolling this out?
Well, I do think it's going to change. I mean, it's a dynamic, evolving situation. And keep in mind, there are people inside these USAPs that very much agree with a more positive approach. But even though there are a lot of them, they don't have the center of gravity, let's call it, right, is where the money is, and with this direction. But so I think that this is going to be a dynamic situation. I've always viewed, don't sit back and be passive. If the people will lead, the leaders will follow. I think that the narrative, yes, of course, there's, all the mainstream media, and they're going to do this, and they'll be jumping through the hoops. But don't think that that's all there is. I mean, there's something called the internet. There's new alternative media. This unacknowledged documentary has had many times more views than any show on CNN or readers of the New York Times.
Right.
So what I tell people is there are things we have to be creative. Those of us who are concerned for a good future for humanity and a good outcome here have to be very creative. And I've had to be very creative because the whole landscape is changing. And not least of which is, when was the last time a documentary was the top documentary for an entire year, like unacknowledged in 2017, and there is a complete blackout in the mainstream media about it? I'll tell you when. Never. And that proves the point we made in the documentary, that a truthful expose of this secrecy is something that would never be covered by the mainstream media, because they are dancing to the tune. When I'll tell you a funny story. There was a man, last name Schwartz, who was on the board of directors of Time Life back in the 90s. I was in New York City, and I was having a meeting with a whole bunch of, muckety-mucks up there, and the UN Secretary General, his wife, and people like that. And this guy pulls me aside. He says, the fourth estate is dead. Fourth estate meaning the media. I said, what are you talking about? He says, we have become scribes taking dictation from the right hand of the king. And he started talking about this cabal. And this is like a major media player in New York on the board of Time Life. And I said, yeah, I'm aware of that. He says, well, I can tell you for a fact that's what it is. He had gotten some classified documents, old ones related to this so-called Majestic 12 years ago, gave them to Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes. Mike Wallace was going to do an expose and was shot down and wasn't allowed to by CBS. And he told me that that's why Mike Wallace went into that really deep depression. And Mike Wallace went on Larry King and actually talked about that he was so depressed because he said, and I'm quoting, I realized I was my career, I was a fraud. And Larry King said, what do you mean a fraud? Well, he didn't go into this, but this is what he was talking about. A friend of his, this guy Schwartz, told me that's why Mike Wallace, one of the biggest investigative journalists of the 20th century, who was on 60 Minutes for a very long time, wanted to do this expose, and it was before I came on the scene in 1990, and CBS shot him down. And that's when he realized that they were all scribes taking dictation from the right hand of the king. So I tell people, just keep that vision in mind when you see something on CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, Fox, NPR, BBC, any of the things that are media of record. And you're going to need to, just be very skeptical, frankly. And it'll hold you in good stead. So just don't be fooled,
Well, okay. So let me play devil's advocate, if I may. Sure. CE5, the film, blockbuster. And now you are out doing interviews on Fox and CNN and BBC.
I believe that when I see it.
Right. I mean, do you become part of, and would you be surprised if you were approached and told what to say and how to control this?
Sure, and that's what they've done in the past. I mean, not long ago, a major media company wanted me to do a show. They wanted to fold in all kinds of fear-based, fear-mongering crap into it. I said I wouldn't be part of it, and I bowed out. Look, one thing people don't understand of me, I don't care about money, and I don't care about fame. Neither has any currency with me, and never has. I care about the human future. When I had a near-death experience when I was 17, and when I came back from that, what I realized is that, wow, the universe is amazing, and the future of this planet is amazing, and somehow we need to do it. So, that was, you do the math. It was 47 years ago. But my point in all this is to say, people need to have standards. I mean, there are a number of networks that have wanted me on, but they wanted to have me on where it's going to be folded into something where it's one part truth, two parts fear-mongering and war-mongering. I won't do it. I'd rather not. So, you have to choose what you're going to do. And this is something that comes into my life probably on a 2 or 3 times a week basis. And I'm not saying I've become a recluse. I'm a little bit sometimes, but it's made me be very cautious because I don't want to empower something where there's somebody on a network going on and on about reptilian slave ships that have captured babies and are trading them in an intergalactic war. At the same time, I'm trying to bring in information on Admiral Tom Wilson and the man who just came out of the technology management office who had baseline clearance across 18 USAPs. I don't want to mix, something that's legit and then have that empower a fear-based fantasy narrative, which is, unfortunately, the majority of what passes out there in the UFO community and also in the media. So I just tend to be, at this point, careful because I think that I don't want to hurt. The thing that keeps me up most, Jimmy, is I don't want to be part of something that hurts the human consciousness instead of helping it. I don't want to empower something that, gets then diverted by the power of the evidence that we have into a narrative that is the foundation for World War III. So this is really, honestly, what keeps me awake at night more than anything.
What is interesting about that statement, which is powerful, Dr. Greer, there are those out there, and you've heard it long enough, that say that you have been bought and sold, right? You've got Rockefeller money, nonsense. You're part, and you've heard it all, right? But
sure, it's nonsense.
Right, those words go in direct conflict with the fear-based narrative that is being presented right now. So does that clear your name?
The people sitting in pajamas making up nonsense, I could care less about.
Right.
They're trolls. Let's call them what they are. When was the last time you met a doctor who gave up $500,000 to $600,000 a year for many, many years to do something where my wife and I have no office, no paid staff? My wife has had 2 very aggressive cancers in the last 5 years that have almost killed her. I have almost died from a cancer that almost killed me. We're pushing through without a scintilla of the kind of support that you see that charlatans are getting.
Right.
And so to the people who make those claims, I would just say you couldn't be more wrong, and I could care less about it, because those are the kinds of people that are always going to be out there because the internet is filled with these kind of trolls. And if that was what would determine, anything I would do or say, I would have thrown in the towel, 25 years ago. But I think that that's one of the issues here is, why would anyone do what we're doing? Why would the people who come forward risk their reputations and their careers to tell the truth to the public? Why would a medical doctor give up his medical career when he has 4 kids to put through college, for Christ's sake? The idea that somehow there's some big cabal funding us is a joke. If that were the case, why am I have a 4 foot by 1.5 foot little desk in my living room, and my wife helps me in an adjacent little teeny den that's a tiny little room, and we're doing this with no staff and no office? Really? We would be doing that night and day if we're being funded by some nefarious sources. Those people are so full of baloney. But the point I'm making is that I really don't care what those kind of people say. I'm more interested in the fact that the masses of people, and many people who, for example, seen Unacknowledged 10 times to absorb all the information in it, we want to do that with this next documentary film. It's going to be a 2-hour film that's going to be a tour of consciousness and the science of consciousness and contact, and how people can form a team and make contact themselves and leave this whole cabal of sociopaths behind and manifest a beautiful planet in the future. That's what this is about. And at the same time, I think it's important to stay involved with disclosure and trying to put as much information out as we can. But I think we all have a responsibility morally, ethically, to not allow ourselves to get caught up in the power of the knowledge of this subject being spun into something that ends up leading to some disastrous outcome for humanity. And that's the reason, I'm not someone who talks about personality in groups, but once I saw what was happening with Elizondo and that, what this type of CIA calls the rat pack that's been scamming the public for 30, 40 years, and the government. He specifically says he's been scamming the public. They've been scamming the government as well. Just as Admiral Wilson comments, that when it started breaking into the news so heavily, which normally the New York Times and these big media have a policy never to cover the UFO subject, I knew someone had pulled a trigger. And I knew we were in a different era. And I said that, I think, on your show a couple years ago.
Yes.
So I think that this is something we have to be vigilant for, but not be overwhelmed by it. We just have to speak the truth, keep finding what the truth is. Hopefully there will be other things like this commentary from Admiral Wilson, where he confirms much of the detail of not only the meeting but the nature of the USAPs and the fact that he was being denied access. I think that has been a point that a lot of people have heard me say that in a lecture on YouTube or what have you, and they go, "No, that can't be."
Right.
I'm going, "Yeah, it is." I'm not making this up. I mean, the CIA director, when I briefed him, he was new to all this. He was almost in tears after this almost 3 hours of meeting at a private dinner. And then Booz Allen Hamilton made him a certain offer, and suddenly he's out there attacking me. So the other part of this is that it's a Shakespearean level of people doing this, getting to a certain level. If they get bought off, then they're going to betray what we're trying to do, even though I was the guy who opened the door for them on this information. Now, that's happened hundreds and hundreds of times. Fine. It's human nature. Look, I mean, back in 92, I had a clique of people, including the head of Army intelligence, offer me $2 billion to shut up.
How much?
$2 billion.
$2 billion? Hey,
$2
everybody's got their price, Dr. Greer, and I think right there.
I don't.
Right there, too. No, I'm kidding.
I could care less. But that's true.
Yeah.
And actually, when I said...
That's a good number.
When I told him no thanks, he went to my wife and tried to convince her to convince me. And that happened with astronaut Brian O'Leary. We were at the St. Malo's retreat near Estes Park, Colorado, and we were organizing a conference for UFO researchers around the world. And this was in May of 92. And it was a serious offer, and an offer of a board level seat on this committee, because they knew I didn't even have the concept of disclosure in 92, but they knew we had started the CE5 Initiative, where people were going out making contact. This is the wild card.
He went to your wife. If you didn't shut him down, the last person he needed to go to was your wife, because that was the imperial shutdown, I'm sure. She actually didn't know what to think. But I'm just saying that, look, if I wanted to take a buyout, I would have taken it and gotten the $2 billion in 92. The difference between this document leak and other documents like SERPO or MJ12 and all of that stuff is that all of the players here, except for Edgar Mitchell, are still with us. And that changes the dynamic on this document, unlike anything else that has come before, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it does. And because it's confirmatory to something that most people, even inside government, couldn't believe would be possible, that's why it's so important. This whole level of USAPs and unacknowledged special access projects, where someone of this stature, the man that I recently met with from the Technology Management Office in the sub-basement of the Pentagon, his whole career had been in the Army. He retired after a career, then was hired as a civilian and got pulled into this USAP. He said that his entire career, he had never heard of an unacknowledged special access project. He had been involved in plenty of SAPs, special access projects, but he didn't even know the concept of a USAP. And he had spent his entire career. So one of the things that I think is wonderful about this is that he specifically refers to USAPs, unacknowledged special, how they're buried within and covered up by other special access projects, and that he was denied access, and the kinds of other people who should have had oversight denied access, like General Patrick Hughes. That is, honestly, and Dolan is correct, explosive.
Yeah, and there was one other thing. I know that we ran past here, and I know it's late on the East Coast, but it brings up one point that I thought was very interesting, which was he was talking about a yearly budget, and there was no tracking of it. It was a cumulative budget. We only know what has overall been spent on these programs, but we have no idea, and I can't get access to what the budgets are on these USAPs. And that was pretty revealing. I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, that's something else that I've actually spoken about extensively, and how these are covered within other operations. It's actually in our disclosure materials, but we have much material. A lot of people, don't drill down on this kind of detail. But yes, and that is how. I mean, we're talking trillions and trillions of dollars. Don't forget, the day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld himself said that there were $2.3 trillion unaccounted for in the Department of Defense spending. Trillion. Look at that. All right. Now imagine. Now this is 18 years later. And now it's more like probably 8 trillion. Nobody really knows. But we're talking an enormous amount of spending because, and one of the things that like this gentleman who recently surfaced from the technology man, he said, not only is the spending beyond what you can imagine, but technologies we have that are fully operational are beyond your wildest imagination. And he saw them. I said, yes, I'm aware of that. I became aware of them in the mid 90s and early 90s. And he said that if the public knew it, they couldn't even begin to wrap their mind around it. So that's why I have to laugh when there are people, I don't care if they're with TTSA or who they are, they say, well, we really don't know how these work. We need to start studying this, don't you think? And I'm going, yeah, right. After trillions of dollars, and we have all this stuff that's operational, but it's in a USAP and it's covered and hidden. I mean, look, if the head of intelligence with the Joint Staff couldn't crack into there and get fully briefed on it, what makes people think they're going to do a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, and get anything? The FOIA officer isn't cleared to a USAP. And the Department of Justice, if they tried to bring lawsuit, they're specifically blocked because the USAPs will just say, this project doesn't exist, and you can't get any actionable evidence or even do discovery. Well, I know this because this is the case that recently happened where they were trying to court-martial and then prosecute a 3-star general who had violated security. And the Department of Justice tried to pursue it, and they couldn't because the USAP said, you can't get access to anything to proceed with this case. So this is where the rule of law breaks down very quickly.
I want to close with this. I want to swing back to the new film, the CE5 film. I want you to make a promise to me right now. I know, and I've seen some of your private stock footage. I know that you are sitting on the most incredible CE5 footage that the public has not seen. Are we going to see the good stuff in this film?
You're going to see all of it. Yeah, it's going to blow your mind, actually. Up to and including, there's a beautiful story that happened last couple of years. We were up in Arizona, and there was this older man that had a permanent hearing loss since he was a teenager, had hearing aids, and he had this contact with this ET with sort of a triangular shaped head, large, and the ET healed him of his permanent hearing loss. And we got a photograph of the ET standing beside this man and next to another member of our team while we're in circle. It's astonishing, beautiful story. All this is going to be in this movie.
Looking forward to it. And everybody, the website is CEIFilm.com. The links are at jimmychurchradio.com. Go and visit the site. Everything is there for you, not only to help out with the film, but to learn what the film is going to be about this next time around. Dr. Greer, thank you so much. Very open and candid conversation.
At the premiere, my friend. You can come to the premiere. It'll be fun.
You know what? I'm going to interview you again. At the premiere, at the red carpet. That was fun last time.
It was fun.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greer. Right. And keep doing what you're doing, man. Don't change.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.
As everybody noticed, Dr. Greer and I blew straight through a network commercial break. I want to thank Dr. Greer for allowing that to happen. So I'm going to get to that commercial break right now. This is Fade to Black. I want to thank Dr. Stephen Greer for a very open and comprehensive conversation tonight. Let me get this commercial break out of the way. Got to pay the bills. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. CE5Film.com is the link. We've got it up there on Twitter, and it's on jimmychurchradio.com. I'll be right back after this short break. Stay with me.